Justice Breyer has announced he's retiring from the Supreme Court, opening up the option for Biden and the Democrats to fill that seat. As I'm sure most of you have heard, Biden committed to nominating a black woman, which would be the first on the Supreme Court. And let me say, I love that he's gonna do that, but I don't understand why he feels the need to commit to that beforehand. And I felt the same way with his vice presidential pick. Before he even picked a person, he said it was gonna be a woman and hopefully a woman of color. And the reason I don't like this is it opens that person up to being delegitimized from the right, because they'll say, oh, the only reason you picked them is because they're a black woman, not because they're a black woman and very qualified. Which in these criticisms of Biden, that's always missed. A lot of people on the right will say, oh my gosh, he doesn't care about picking someone qualified. All he cares about is picking a black woman. And it's like, don't you understand that you can take a group of qualified candidates and then pick a black woman out of them? Because guess what? There's lots of black qualified women candidates. But in my personal opinion, I wish he would just keep that to himself so that he could pick a black woman, have that commitment in his head, but not have everyone think he just did it to check a box. And the context to that commitment is it was made on the campaign trail when he was running for president. So it makes sense because it is a politically beneficial thing to say, but I do think it's led to a lot of extra criticism of this potential pick. So in a second here, we're going to look at a few of the people he's considering, but I'll first just say it's a little bit underwhelming because it's not like this pick is going to sway the leanings of the Supreme Court. It is super conservative and it's going to stay that way. Right now it's 6-3, and Justice Breyer is one of those 3 liberal justices. He'll get replaced and it'll stay 6-3. So there's a little bit of sadness to it because I wish this was changing the tide of the Supreme Court, but it's not. It is, though, really good that Breyer stepped down because for a second there was reporting that he was getting offended that people wanted him to, which is so dumb because obviously people on the left are going to want you to retire so that your seat can be filled by Biden instead of a Republican president if they take over in 2024. Because we've already seen some bad rulings from the Supreme Court with this 6-3 leaning, but if it was 7-2, yikes. So based on reporting and public discourse, there's dozens of names that Biden is considering, but in my mind, it comes down to 3 people. We'll start with the one that has received a lot of criticism from progressives and unions, but received the strong support of Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn and Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. And the reason I say it like that is because you have to be very mindful whenever you see Republicans and Democrats working together. Not because bipartisanship is inherently a bad thing. You can definitely, in theory, work together across the aisle to make positive change. But in our current political climate, a lot of times that just means that these 2 politicians have a similar corporate special interest group or groups that they want to help. And that segues nicely into a point I wanted to make sure that I made, and that is that the whole concept of a neutral justice who just reads the Constitution, can interpret exactly what the founders meant, and then spits out a ruling that's perfectly aligned with that is just nonsense. Every single human being has opinions, they have a worldview, and that worldview is gonna inform the way that you interpret the Constitution. And there is so much wiggle room and gray area and things left out of the text of the Constitution that there's no way as a justice that you can possibly rule on these cases in a complete unbiased manner. It's totally okay. Our justices have biases and we just have to pick ones that align with our moral principles. And don't get it twisted, the politicians who are pushing for certain picks absolutely know that. They're just trying to find someone who will rule in ways that align with their political ideology. So as people on the left and progressive, just you can be shameless about wanting someone who shares your political ideology and will rule in a liberal or progressive manner. And what's so funny is it's the right a lot of times that talks about we don't want an activist justice on the court and we want them to just read it exactly as it's written. But then you go back and look at the previous writings and statements from these people in their past careers, and they are very ideological and always very far right. So going back to the Jim Clyburn and Lindsey Graham mutual support of one of these picks, the reason that you have to assume that they support the same person is because somewhere on their little ideological Venn diagram, there's an overlap and that person sits in the overlap. And when it comes to moderate Democratic and Republican politicians, that overlap is almost always about being in favor of corporations over workers. And let me just say, as a voter, you can be moderate. Like, that's a thing that happens. You're a moderate, you're kind of in the middle, you see both sides. That's totally admirable. But as politicians, all that moderate means is that they want to side with corporations, millionaires, billionaires, and their special interests more than the average voter and the average worker. So if you're someone out there who considers yourself kind of a moderate, don't get tricked and swayed by politicians who call themselves that, because if you go look at a moderate Democrat's voting record, it almost always just means that they're more pro-corporate than their Democratic colleagues. And please, I know there's some rhetoric out there on the left that's just like, let's hate corporations and hate billionaires and millionaires, but not explain why. And that's not what it's about for me. What it's about is that right now, corporations and the wealthy have way too much power in our political system and in our broader society, and that's causing the average worker not to get the wage that they deserve, to not have the proper voice in their workplace, and for their vote not to matter in our political system as much as it should. And so this isn't about just going after corporations for fun. This is about balancing the scale to the level that it should be at, where the voices of the average worker aren't so stomped on and unheard. So getting back to these potential picks, when I heard that Jim Clyburn and Lindsey Graham supported the same person, my assumption before I read anything about her was, oh, she's probably not very worker friendly. And sure enough, union leaders are increasingly wary of President Biden's potential selection of Judge J. Michelle Childs, so that's who I've been referring to this whole time, as a Supreme Court justice, citing her time working on behalf of employers against worker claims. The situation sets up a potential rift with Representative James E. Clyburn, a top Democrat who has been pushing for her nomination. She comes from an anti-union law firm where she spent time defending employers from claims of civil rights and labor law violations. David Borer, general counsel of the American Federation of Government Employees, said in an interview, "That's not what we need." Which I totally agree with. And to be clear, she's had plenty of perfectly fine rulings in the position she currently holds and isn't some terrible person or anything. It's just that there's so many amazingly qualified black women who you could pick who don't have this history with labor like she does. There's a long list to choose from, Nelson said, and Nelson is the president of the Association of Flight Attendants. That's why it's great that President Biden can pass on a management side lawyer like Childs, who has argued disdainfully against workers' rights in favor of several other candidates who have been in the trenches with workers and have a proven record of upholding worker rights. Which is totally right. And as I previously said, even if you're a conservative, you do know that right now corporations and the wealthy have way too much power in our current economic and political system. You get that. And so we need advocates in these high important positions to be fighters for workers and for labor rights. And according to this Washington Post article that I've been reading from, Ketanji Brown Jackson, U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, is seen to be a frontrunner and is preferred by a lot of these people in the article who are speaking out against Childs. But I also read up a bit on Leandra Kruger, who is a California Supreme Court justice, which also seemed like a better option than Childs for the left. And let me be clear, if Republicans, every single time they have an opportunity, are going to put super conservative Supreme Court justices on the bench, then it would be so dumb for Democrats to appoint sort of mixed bag type people who side with liberals a lot of times, but then also conservatives. Then you really have no hope of the Supreme Court ruling properly on a lot of these important cases. And let me just reiterate one more time, this is not even me focusing so much on the social things right now, because yes, if you're a conservative and you're watching, we're going to disagree on if the Supreme Court should have legalized gay marriage. I think that's amazing. You probably don't like that. But when it comes to the reasons that I'm advocating for certain candidates right now over others, it comes down to being for workers and not always siding with the employer and the corporation. And that's something that I think regardless of where you are as a voter on the political spectrum, we can agree on. Biden has said he's going to try to fill the seat quickly, which I think is a smart move because Republicans historically will definitely try to block your nomination if it's too close to an election. And of course, the hypocrisy is enraging because they blocked Obama's nominee, Merrick Garland, for months. And then whenever it was time for Trump to nominate someone, they literally appointed Amy Coney Barrett when 60 plus million people had already voted in the 2020 election. Okay, too close to an election, my buttocks. And hopefully it'll be someone who's somewhat young so that they'll be there a long time. And of course, someone who's pro-worker and progressive. Here's what else you need to know today. The National Archives has gotten possession of 15 boxes of documents that Donald Trump illegally took from the White House to Mar-a-Lago, but they probably won't find anything interesting because reporting has also come out revealing that Trump ripped up official government documents anytime he wanted to keep the content of said documents a secret, which is also illegal. More than 900,000 official COVID deaths have been documented, which is such a grim and disturbing landmark. A bill has been proposed in the Iowa legislature that would have cameras in children's classrooms that would live stream all day for parents to watch to make sure that the teachers aren't teaching anything the parents don't approve of. So creepy. Mike Pence has finally spoke out against Trump's lies that he could have overturned the election, calling it un-American, which is correct, but a little late, Mike. And finally, Biden says a Russia to Germany pipeline would not go forward if Russia invades Ukraine. Be well, everybody.